as you, as representatives of the community, formed as a jury, fairly and impartially hear the evidence in that dispute or grievance. From that evidence, you determine what facts have been proved, and then you apply that govern all of our lives in society to those facts and determine through that process what has been established and the outcome of that case. You sit here for one trial, but understand you sit as part of what is an unbroken tradition of service by citizens of the Commonwealth, serving as jurors, going back to the founding of this nation, and indeed before the founding of this nation. Now, who can tell me the second president of the United States? Come on, who paid attention in 8th grade civics? Yes? John Adams. John Adams was the second president of the United States. Who can tell me what John Adams did before he was a president? What was his profession? Come on, you can say it. He was a lawyer. We are on a roll. John Adams was indeed an attorney. Where did John Adams practice law? Someone guess.
I'm going to guess Boston.
Boston. All right. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Who can name a case John Adams was associated with? Think back to colonial times. Think back to Adams. Think back to Boston. Anything come to mind? I'm sorry? The Tea Party was not a case. It was tossing of the tea in rebellion to the tax. But you're close. The Boston Massacre. 237 years ago and 2 days, the Boston Massacre took place. The Boston Massacre being the firing into a crowd, I think today we recognize it to be a mob, by British soldiers in front of the old State House just 2 blocks down the way. John Adams was the defense lawyer in that trial. And think about it for a minute. The 8 British soldiers were charged with the crime of murder. John Adams, one of our great patriots and founding fathers, defended those soldiers. And indeed, as the result of his representation, all but 2 were acquitted of charges. Now, why do I tell you that? In the last, 12, 15 years, there's been some renewed interest into John Adams as a historical figure. Led to a best-selling biography by David McCullough on the life of John and Abigail Adams, and that was turned into an award-winning miniseries that ran on HBO a couple of years ago. And in connection with the renewed interest into Adams as a historical figure, historians looked into the records of our court at the time John Adams practiced law in the 1760s, 1770s. And it was discovered that our courts opened then, as we do today, with that same cry of court, that same formal incantation and invitation to anyone to come before the court, give your attendance, you shall be heard. So understand, you sit here for one trial, but you sit here as part of that long and distinguished service by citizens serving as jurors. Now, we call this a cry of court. Perhaps that term sounds a little bit odd or anachronistic, but it does have a historical basis. In years past, our courts didn't sit year-round. There wasn't enough business. The courts were sited in each county seat in the Commonwealth. So Boston for Suffolk County, for instance, Dedham for Norfolk County, Cambridge being the shire town for Middlesex County, and so forth throughout the state. And judges would travel from courthouse to courthouse, and that was called riding the circuit. That is, a judge would come to Boston and conduct the business of that court for some period of time. The period might be a week or a month or a couple of months. That was called a term of court. And when the business was completed, when that term was over, the judge would pack their saddlebags and ride off to the next county and do the same thing in the next county, and so forth and so on, going around a circuit of courts. Indeed, today, while our courts are open year-round in all counties, the Superior Court, this court, is still a circuit court. We continue that tradition. Today it means that roughly every 3 months or so, the 82 judges of the Superior Court pack up their desks, and we move. And we move to a different session or perhaps a different court. That tradition of riding the circuit, so-called, continues today. But because courts were not open year-round, there had to be some way to let the public know when the court was open in a particular county and particular courthouse. It is one reason why courthouses were sited in the center of town. People could see the doors were open, the candles were lit, the court was conducting business. But as well, when the court was sitting, when that term of court was taking place in a particular county, each morning, the historical predecessor to today's court officer, back then the bailiff or the sheriff, would go out into the town square each morning and cry out, "Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All those having anything to do before the court, draw near, give your attendance, you shall be heard." We will have a quiz on this later on, but we're now ready to move to more current events. Let me just say, as I told you, this is something I like to comment on in every trial. My court staff knows it by heart. In fact, Ms. King has heard it so many times that a couple of years ago at Christmas, she presented me with my John Adams is my homeboy coffee mug, which adorns my desk. All right, let us move to trial now before the court. Mr. Hagan.
Thank you, Your Honor. The Commonwealth calls Sergeant Detective Daniel Duff.
You solemnly swear the testimony you should give this court and jury, and the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar, to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so be God?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
Watch, step, have a seat right
Mr. Hagan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Daniel Duff, D-U-F-F.
What is your occupation, sir?
I'm a sergeant detective with the Boston Police Department.
Sergeant Detective Duff, how long have you been with the Boston Police Department?
27 years.
Can you describe for ladies and gentlemen of the jury during that 27 years at the Boston Police Department what areas or units you've been assigned to?
I started working in Roxbury. I spent 5 years there as a patrolman. I spent 2 years in Brighton as a patrolman. I was promoted to detective in 1997. I spent 8 years in District 11 in Dorchester. Transferred to the homicide unit. I spent 1.5 years in the homicide unit as a detective. I was promoted to sergeant and worked in Mattapan as a sergeant in uniform. I was then transferred back to the homicide unit as a sergeant detective. I spent about 3.5 years there. And I then transferred to the crime scene unit about 6 years ago, my present assignment.
And Sergeant Detective Duff, what is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I also have a master's degree in criminal justice.
I'm calling your attention back, Sergeant Detective Duff, to your testimony regarding being a detective in the homicide unit and a sergeant detective in the homicide unit. Would you describe briefly what the difference is between sergeant detective in the homicide unit and detective?
A detective works in a squad along with 1 or 2 other detectives under the supervision of a sergeant detective. I went back as a sergeant detective and I was in charge of one of the homicide squads.
Sir, if you could estimate approximately how many homicide investigations have you been either a detective or supervising sergeant detective on?
About 50 or 60.
Now, Sergeant Detective, you indicated you testified at the end of your experience that you are now currently a Sergeant Detective assigned to the Crime Scene Response Unit. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what are your responsibilities in that role, sir?
I respond to serious crime scenes along with the patrolmen in the crime scene unit, homicides, fatal accidents, officer-involved shootings.
And as a Sergeant Detective, sir, do you supervise other crime scene or crime scene investigators or crime scene response officers?
Yes.
How many are under your supervision, sir?
At a scene, usually about 2 or 3.
Now, Sergeant Detective, can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what specialized training you've received relative to crime scene processing? And when I ask that question, I mean not only in your current role, but even in your role as previous to that as a detective.
When I was promoted to detective, I received training at the Boston Police Academy as far as fingerprinting and photographing crime scenes, also the collection of DNA evidence. I received additional training at the crime scene unit with regard to those topics. I also received training while I was in the homicide unit about responding to homicide scenes and crime scenes.
Calling attention now to some specialized outside training you've received, Sergeant Detective. Have you received any training in crime scene photography?
Yes.
And what is that, sir?
It's basic photography, but with an emphasis on how to photograph crime scenes. It was put on by a representative from Nikon.
Was that an 8-hour course, sir?
There was one 8-hour course, and there was also a 24-hour course.
I'm calling your attention now, Sergeant Detective, to a company called Finest Forensic Consultants. Did you receive a basic crime scene management course from them?
Yes, I did.
How long was that course?
That was an 8-hour course, I believe.
Calling your attention now, Sergeant Detective, to something called medical legal investigation of death. Did you receive any training from that in that regard, sir?
That was a week-long training seminar at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City.
What does that mean exactly, medical legal investigation?
They have a different process for processing crime scenes in New York, but essentially the training concerned different types of death investigations, shootings, stabbings, drownings, poisoning, and different types of wounds and wound characteristics.
Calling your attention now, sir, to something called practical homicide investigation, a training put on by PHI Consultants. Did you attend that training as well, sir?
Yes, I did.
When was that, if you recall?
That was, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. That was a 3-day course.
What about footwear impression training? Calling your attention now to the Henry Lee Institute. Did you get training from the Henry Lee Institute on footwear impressions?
I got training from Henry Lee Institute, and I also got training in footwear impression. I'm not sure if that was the same training or different trainings.
And what about oral swab collection? Did you receive some training at the Boston Police Department Crime Laboratory in that regard, sir?
Yes, I did.
Sergeant Detective Duff, I'm calling your attention now to any teaching experience that you have. Can you summarize for the jurors what teaching experience you've had in crime scene investigations?
I've been asked to teach at the Boston Police Academy, basic crime scene response for new recruits, crime scene processing for new detectives, and crime scene management for patrol supervisors for the new sergeants.
And in fact, sir, have you ever presented for an outside agency? Specifically, I'm referring to the Colonel Henry Williams homicide seminar?
Yes, I presented a case study in a homicide at that seminar in 2012, and I was asked to come back, I believe, in 2014 and again in 2015.
And sir, in your role as a crime scene response unit sergeant detective, have you testified in courts in this Commonwealth before and provided opinion testimony relative to crime scene processing based on your role?
Yes.
Sergeant Detective Duff, I'm going to call your attention now to a particular incident, that being the homicides or the deaths of 2 individuals, Safira Furtado and Daniel Diabreu, which occurred on July 16th, the year 2012, sometime after 2:30 in the morning. Did you receive a call or a notification to respond to that scene, sir?
Yes, I did.
And do you know approximately what time you received the call?
I believe it was about 2:45 in the morning. I received a page from the operations division, and when I called in, they told me there was a a shooting investigation on Shawmut Ave.
Did you respond to that scene, sir?
Yes, I did.
Do you know approximately what time you arrived at the scene?
About 3:30 in the morning.
Sir, can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you observed upon your first arrival at about 3:30 in the morning of that crime scene?
The area had been blocked off by police vehicles to keep traffic from driving down Shawmut Ave, and crime scene tape was used to rope off the area.
Now, were you the first response officer or sergeant detective from the crime scene response unit, or were there other crime scene response unit officers there?
There were other crime scene response unit officers already present when I arrived there.
Do you recall which officers those were?
Michael Griffin and James Carnes.
Now, upon your arrival, sir, were they under your direction and control and supervision at that point?
Yes.
Sir, describe, if you would, from a general perspective for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what occurs upon your arrival at a crime scene such as this in regards to the processing of the evidence and this processing of the scene.
Generally, we would assess the crime scene, conduct a walkthrough, try to determine what steps needed to be taken to process the scene. We would photograph the scene as we found it, and then we would start marking evidence. We would then take additional photos, close-ups of any evidence that we're going to collect, and then collect evidence.
Now, in this process, sir, that you've described, do you consult with homicide detectives who are also present at the scene?
Absolutely.
And in this particular case, did you consult with Sergeant Detective Mark Sullivan from the homicide unit?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness, Ron?
You may.
Sergeant Detective Duff, I'm going to ask you to look at a large diagram, actually two of them, but one at a time. First, I'd show you this diagram and ask you if you recognize it, sir.
Yes, I do.
Is this diagram a fair and accurate representation of the crime scene on the intersection of Shawmut Avenue and Harold Street that you found on July 16, 2012, and in particular showing where various pieces of evidence were marked by Boston Police cones?
Yes.
You're going to offer this board and a smaller version as the next numbered exhibit A and B.
Is there any objection?
No, sir.
Without objection, is that 60A, 60B?
Yeah, sure.
Very good.
Which is the, I'm sorry, largest one.
I'm sorry. I think A is large, B is small. Secondly, Sergeant Detective, I'm going to show you another diagram and ask you to look at it and tell me if you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
And is this essentially the same board that has just been entered as exhibit number 60A, but with the added addition of 4 photographs from the crime scene, sir?
Yes, it is.
And is this still a fair and accurate representation of the crime scene from July 16, 2012?
Yes.
You're off the large board and the smaller board as the next number of exhibits A and B.
Counsel, without objection?
No objection, sir.
Thank you. 61A and B.
Now, Sergeant Detective, prior to testifying today, did you have an opportunity to view and observe and study the contents of the thumb drive that I'm placing before you now?
Yes, I did.
And does that thumb drive contain fair and accurate representation, 58 photographs to be exact, digital form from the crime scene of this July 16, 2012?
Yes.
And can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and the court if there's any difference with digital photography when it's printed out as opposed to when it's viewed on a computer screen?
Well, depending on the printer that you use, they can come out in poorer quality if you don't have a very good photo quality printer. So if you can view it on a computer screen, you can adjust the brightness or zoom in or zoom out.
And in fact, the thumb drive that I've just shown you that you've had a prior opportunity to look at that in fact has digital photographs that are of higher quality than printouts. Is that correct, sir?
They appeared to be the original quality.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd move to introduce the thumb drive of the 58 crime scene photographs.
Counsel?
May I approach Mr. Hagan for a moment? No objection, sir.
Exhibit 62.
Now, for the record, Sergeant Detective, I've just placed exhibit number 62 into the computer. There is now a photograph that's depicted on the screen. And just so the record is clear, this is photograph number 1 of the 58 for exhibit 62. Would you describe for ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what is this photograph depict?
It's what's known as a grayscale card. It has the location to put the date, time, location, the case number, and the photographer's name on it. There's also a scale on the left side, a gray scale on the right side, and a color scale on the bottom.
What is the purpose of this photograph or of the grayscale as you described it?
We use it to bookmark the beginning and end of the photos we take. So we would take a grayscale card with the start time on it before we take any photographs, and when we're done, we would take an additional photo of the grayscale card with the end time.
And so the time that these photographs were beginning to be taken was 3:50 in the morning, is that correct?
That's correct.
For the record, I'm going to move to the next photograph that's labeled as 2. This is just a photograph indicating the intersection from which the photographs would be taken.
The location of the scene, yes,
And that's the intersection of Shawmut Avenue and Herald Street.
that's correct.
Placing on the screen photograph number 3 of exhibit 62. Can you describe what we see in this photograph, sir?
This is a photograph of a BMW. You're looking at the front end of it. There's 2 strands of crime scene tape crossing Shawmut Ave near Herald Street.
And as you previously described, Sergeant Detective, this initial set of photographs that we're about to go through, are those photographs taken prior to the placing of Boston Police evidence markers?
Yes,
And just to give the jurors some perspective, the photograph that we're looking at now on the screen, number 3 of exhibit 62, is that looking from the direction of Herald Ave looking up Herald Street looking up Shawmut Avenue towards Tremont.
that's correct.
And the photograph that we see on the screen, sir, is that fairly and accurately depict the general lighting conditions at that intersection?
Yes,
Just moving to the next photograph, exhibit 62, photograph 4. Is that just a more close-up photograph of the front of that BMW?
yes it is.
Photograph number 5, does that show a particular side of the BMW, sir?
Yes, it's the passenger side.
And again, does this photograph generally fairly and accurately depict the lighting conditions in that area?
Yes, it was dark out, but the camera had a flash on it, so we were able to use the flash to light up the scene.
Other than the flash, Sergeant Detective, were there any lighting trucks or anything like that brought in?
No,
Placing on the screen what's been entered again, exhibit 62, which is photograph number 6. Does that show the back of the BMW?
yes it does.
Just to give the jurors some perspective, again, is that looking from Shawmut Avenue down towards Herald Street? So the photograph was taken from about where I have the laser pointer there, sir?
Yes,
Calling your attention now to photograph number 7 of what's been entered as exhibit number 62. Does that show a particular side of the vehicle?
it shows the driver's side taken from the perspective of the sidewalk towards the car.
And the area that we see here appears to be some type of debris on the side of the car. What is that, sir?
A broken window glass.
And was that the only broken window glass that you observed on that car, sir?
Yes,
It was just on the back rear driver's side, is that correct?
correct.
And was there any glass on the opposite side, being the passenger side of the vehicle?
No,
Photograph number 8, is that a photograph of the back of the BMW?
Yes, it's taken from further back along Shawmut towards Herald.
And would that be taken from further back towards Marginal Street, that is the next cross street?
Yes,
The next photograph, number 9, is that a close-up of the back of the vehicle?
yes,
And I'm going to go through the next few photographs. 10 is just a license plate, correct?
the rear license plate, yes.
And now we're on number 11. Is that a more close-up view of the side of the vehicle, sir?
Yes, the driver's side.
While we have this on the screen, Sergeant Detective, let me just bring you back a moment. When you arrived at the scene, I believe you said it was about 3:30 in the morning, is that correct?
Yes,
Were there sheets already placed on the vehicle?
yes,
And were you aware of who had placed those sheets?
no,
And calling your attention now to general crime scene processing and rules and procedures, are you aware of a rule of the Boston Police Department known as Rule 205, death investigations?
yes,
And are you familiar with it? Have you read it?
yes.
And what, to your understanding, is Rule 205 as far as, is it a rule or is it a guideline?
It states right in it that it's a guideline.
And what are some of the considerations that you use when you're processing a crime scene as far as how big you make the crime scene, where you place the tape, and those types of things, sir?
It depends on the scene. Every scene is unique.
How is every scene unique? Explain that, sir, if you would.
Every scene is different. Some are in very confined areas, and some are in a large field. So it depends on how far the investigator thinks he needs to cordon off the area.
And not only the investigators, sir, but would that also include consultation from you as a sergeant detective with the crime scene response unit?
Yes,
And upon your arrival at this particular scene on July 16, 2012, did you direct anybody to extend the crime scene based upon something you saw or heard?
nope,
And Sergeant Detective, in addition to what we see here, were the bodies themselves also sheeted?
yes, they were.
And I've just moved to photograph number 12 of Exhibit 62, the front of the vehicle, more close up, sir, is that right?
Yes,
Photograph 13, another side view of the vehicle from the passenger side, is that correct?
yes,
And photograph number 14 is just the registration sticker,
the inspection sticker, yes,
inspection sticker. Photograph number 15 is the VIN number of the car, is that correct?
yes,
And photograph number 16 is just a sticker on the car, is that correct?
yes,
Photograph 17 of Exhibit 62, is that a more close-up photograph of the back driver's side passenger door that had the broken glass?
yes, that's the rear driver's side door and window.
And what we see up here on the top, what is that, sir, where I've put the cursor?
It's broken glass that's still within the frame, the window frame.
And that extends all the way around over to where I'm putting the cursor there, is that correct?
Yes,
So the missing glass is just this portion here?
yes, yes,
Photograph 18, another photograph of the same window, sir, is that correct?
yes,
Photograph number 19, is that a photograph where the sheets have been slightly moved back to allow at least a viewing of the inside of the car, including the sheeted bodies?
yes,
Same with photograph 20, but this time from the driver's side, is that correct? I'm sorry, the driver's side?
yes,
Photograph 21, the passenger side, sir?
correct.
Placed on the screen now, photograph 22 of Exhibit 62. Can you describe for the jurors what's depicted here, sir?
Yes, it's an interior shot of the rear seat of the BMW from the open door.
Sir, I'm going to zoom in just by moving the mouse wheel. Can you tell us what, if anything, you observed when you looked inside that car on the seat?
There appears to be a piece of a copper metal fragment and a cell phone.
And the copper metal fragment, is that consistent with anything you had seen in the past?
It's consistent with part of a bullet.
And you indicated a cell phone. Is that the area where I've zoomed in here, sir?
Yes,
And the debris of some sort that we see up here on the seat on exhibit number 62, photograph 22, what did that appear to be, sir?
Broken window glass.
Placing on the screen photograph 23 of exhibit 62. Tell us what is depicted here, sir.
It appears to be a reddish-brown stain. It may be blood.
And what part of the car is that on, sir?
It's the passenger side rear quarter.
And just to give the jurors some perspective on exhibit 61, is that right here?
Yes.
And photograph 24, is that a more close-up photograph of those reddish-brown stains that are consistent with blood?
Yes.
Now, so we're going to call your attention to the point of the investigation, at least the crime scene investigation, that you were directing and controlling with the assistance of homicide detectives. After the photographs were taken, was the next phase to be photographs taken with some type of Boston police markers?
Yes.
What is the purpose of the markers? What do they do?
To mark evidence, draw attention to evidence.
Now, sir, prior to placing the markers and then photographing, did you ever take the sheets off of the bodies to photograph the bodies?
Not while we were out on Sherman Ave, no.
Why not, sir?
We didn't feel it would be the best area to be conducting an investigation like that, and I believe we also needed a search warrant to get inside the car.
Let's start with the first reason, sir. You indicated that it might not be the best place to process the car, including the processing of the bodies. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, it was dark out, it was still nighttime, the lighting conditions were not optimal. Also, we're in public view. I don't think it would be the best circumstances to be doing that sort of investigation in the view of the public.
Was any news media present, sir?
Yes.
And did they have video cameras, apparently at least with lights appearing to record at some point?
I believe so, yes.
Now, you also indicated, Sergeant Detective, that you felt that a search warrant was required. Is that correct?
Yes.
And why is that? Explain for the jurors, in case they don't know, what a search warrant is for and in what circumstances such as these it would be used in.
A search warrant is authorization from the court to go into a place and search and look for evidence. In this circumstance, it's someone's private motor vehicle. The police cannot just go into someone's car or house and start looking for evidence. We would need the court's authorization to do so.
And not only this particular case, July 16, 2012, in the vehicle that we're talking about now, but in your experience, not only as a crime scene investigating, supervising sergeant detective, but as a sergeant detective or detective in a homicide unit, had you done search warrants in all similar situations in the past, or most similar situations?
Yes.
And that's even if it's potentially a victim's home or a victim's car?
Yes.
You would still get a search warrant for court authorization to search that vehicle or that residence?
Yes.
And is that done to preserve the integrity of the evidence and ensure that no constitutional rights are violated?
Yes.
Now, sir, again, I've placed on the screen exhibit number 62, photograph 25, and it's the rear of the car. And as you've indicated, sir, this point in the investigation or in the processing of the crime scene, you would place evidence markers. Do we see evidence markers in this photograph?
Yes, you can see evidence markers 2 and 4.
2 and 4. And just giving, again, the jurors some perspective, 2 is back here behind the vehicle, exhibit 61. 4 is right here.
2 is on the passenger side and 4 is at the rear.
4 is at the rear. And now going to another angle, photograph 26 of exhibit 62. Does that show cone number 5, which is on the driver's side of the vehicle?
Yes, it does.
And showing you now, it's a photograph number 27 of exhibit 62. Does that show cone 1 and cone 3?
Yes, it does.
Cone 1, what did that represent, sir?
The motor vehicle,
Cone 3, what did that represent?
reddish-brown stain on the ground.
And the next photograph, 28, a similar angle. Now, I've placed on the screen photograph number 29 of exhibit 62, and I'll just quickly move to photograph 30. It appears to be the same angle, but the photograph looks completely different Can you explain, for ladies and gentlemen of the jury, why the photograph looks so different?
Just looking at the photo, it looks like it was a longer shutter exposure, and by doing that, any movement of the camera accounted for some blurriness, but it also is a much brighter photo, but it's a little blurry.
And in fact, when you looked at the digital data for the photograph here on this photograph, number 29, did you see that it had a wider shutter speed?
It had a longer shutter speed, yes.
Going to Exhibit 30, is Exhibit 30 more consistent with your recollection of the lighting conditions at the scene at that time?
Yes,
And does that show the one cone or marker that we haven't yet, or one of the two that we haven't yet talked about, cone number 2 on the passenger side of the vehicle?
I believe we've already addressed it, but it is reddish-brown stain on the passenger side of the motor vehicle, yes.
And number 31, again, a photograph of cone number 4?
It's cone number 4, but you can also see cone numbers 5 on the driver's side on the ground and cone number 2 on the ground on the passenger side.
Photograph number 32, again, is that a close-up of what's cone number 1, which represented the car?
Yes.
Now, calling your attention to what was marked as cone number 2, where was cone number 2 located?
On the ground by the passenger side of the motor vehicle?
Is that where I'm showing now in Exhibit 61?
Yes.
And this seems to be a close-up photograph of cone number 1, and we see something that appears to be an orange color. What is that, sir?
You say cone number 1 or cone number?
I'm sorry, cone number 2.
Cone number 2. We also use smaller orange evidence markers with a point on the end, so we can be very specific as to what the item is. In the case of small items, we like to use these to specifically show what item we're photographing.
And that's what this orange item is here, sir, is that correct?
That's an evidence marker, yes, it's unnumbered.
Now, backing up a little bit, Sergeant Detective, prior to the evidence, and particularly now we're talking about what appear to be reddish-brown stains on the sidewalk. Prior to that, those areas being marked, describe, if you would, for the jurors, what was done as far as searching the scene to find these reddish-brown stains.
We conducted a walkthrough of the scene. We noticed various areas of reddish-brown stain that went all around the car, and they also led out to Herald Street.
And when you say let out to Herald Street, is that reddish-brown stains leading out over to where I have here marked with cone number 6?
Yes.
Now, when you say you walked around the scene to attempt to find these, how many people were doing this? Was it a few officers or a lot of officers doing it?
At this time, I believe it was myself, Detective McIsaac from the homicide unit, and Officers Griffin and Carnes were right around the motor vehicle.
Sergeant Detective, once you observed reddish-brown stains of some importance to you or significance to you, did you and other officers or supervisors do your best to keep other officers or response personnel from stepping anywhere near that area?
Yes.
And what we have now on the screen, Exhibit 62, photograph 33, cone or marker 2, was this a red-brown stain that was observed, sir?
Yes, and we also placed a piece of what we call ruler tape on the ground, which has ruler markings in metrics and in inches, so that we can have a scale that represents the size of the stain.
And I've placed on the screen Exhibit 34. Does that show the ruler scale as you described, so you can measure the size of the stain?
Yes.
I've placed Exhibit 35 on the screen. Is that another angle of number 2, marker 2, the reddish-brown stain that you've described was measured? Is that correct?
Yes, it shows marker number 2. It also shows the orange evidence marker next to item number 2, and it also shows several other orange markers that indicate drops of reddish-brown stain on the ground.
Just by way of perspective, sir, are we looking at right next to the passenger side rear door now?
Yes.
This is a passenger side rear door.
Yes.
And we're looking at reddish-brown stain droplets here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, Sergeant Detective, when we look at this photograph, is it fair to state that there appear to be numerous droplets, but only certain ones are marked? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you describe what we're looking at and why it was processed that way?
There were numerous drops of blood all around the car. It didn't appear to make sense to us to mark every single one. We marked representative droplets, and then we marked additional droplets with the orange evidence markers, just to give an indication of other locations.
You used the term representative droplets, sir. Would you describe what that means?
As I stated, we weren't going to mark every single drop of reddish-brown stain all over the ground. There were a lot of them, so we marked certain ones all around the car.
And this particular item that was marked as marker or cone number 2, was that collected for potential evidence, sir?
Yes, a swab of that was taken and collected.
Describe, if you would, Sergeant Detective, how a swab is taken or collected from a stain like that.
If it was starting to dry, what we would do is we would take a sterile cotton swab, use distilled water and wet the swab. Then we would take a sample of the droplet with the wet swab. It would be placed in a small cardboard container and marked with the case number, date, time, and then placed in an additional envelope and sent to the crime lab.
Your Honor, I apologize. I don't mean to interrupt Mr. Hagan. May we approach?
And in the area where the red markers are placed, sir, is that again pointing out reddish-brown stains
Yes,
leading up to what was marked as cone number 3, another area where representative stains would be collected by crime scene personnel. Is that correct?
yes.
Mr. Hagan, let me interrupt here for just one moment. Sergeant Duff, you used the term reddish-brown stain.
Yes, sir.
Is that also known as RBS?
Yes.
And is there a reason you use that descriptive term as opposed to, say, blood?
I could say apparent blood. It appeared to be blood to me, but I'm not a chemist or a crime
Well,
lab
tell the
technician.
jury the difference between apparent blood or blood and your use of the term RBS.
RBS is a term that we use. I do not work for the crime lab. I do not do any testing on any of the samples taken, which would confirm whether or not it is blood. We generally use the term RBS to describe these things for that reason. It did appear to be blood. It was consistent what I've seen at other crime scenes as blood.
But do I take it you then wait for some chemical or scientific test to have that determination made?
We don't make that determination. We submit it to the Boston Police Crime Lab, where someone there would make some determination.
Mr. Hagan.
Thank you, Your Honor. And photograph number 37 of Exhibit 62, sir, again, showing cone number 3 or marker number 3, representative area of what appeared to be blood that was taken from the scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is this another area, sir, where a swab was taken, as you've previously described, after it was photographed?
Yes.
I've placed photograph number 38. Does that show a similar marker, a ruler to measure the size of the blood droplets or apparent blood droplets?
Yes.
And this was done prior to taking a sample, is that correct?
Yes.
That sample was taken and submitted to the crime lab?
Yes.
Photograph number 39, is that a close-up photograph of those two particular representative apparent blood stains or blood droplets?
Yes.
Placed on the screen, exhibit number 62, photograph 40. Tell us what we're seeing here.
Again, it's cone number 3, where reddish-brown stains or apparent blood was seen on the ground, and 2 orange markers, one leading away from cone 3.
And do the markers, sir, indicate that the apparent blood stains seem to go off in the direction of cone 6 around the corner on Harold Street?
There was a trail of drops leading out to cone number 6 on Harold Street, yes.
And placing on the screen, photograph number 41 of Exhibit 62. Tell us what we see here.
These are additional drops of RBS on the ground, several of which are marked with orange evidence markers leading towards Herald Street.
Photograph number 42 of Exhibit 62, we now see the sidewalk. Just by way of perspective, Sergeant Detective, is this the area here that's depicted on Exhibit 61?
Yes.
The sidewalk closest to the driver's side door?
It's on the driver's side, but it appears to be between the car and Herald Street.
So in this area right here, sir, where I have the laser pointer?
I believe so, yes.
Just zooming in on photograph number 42, does that show, again, apparent blood drops on the sidewalk area?
Yes.
And this area up here where I'm moving the cursor, is that Herald Street?
Yes.
Up in that direction?
That's heading towards Herald Street, yes.
Number 43, is that also showing the intersection, the corner of Herald Street and Shawmut Avenue with a marker showing apparent blood stains?
Yes, there's a marker showing one blood stain, but there's many other blood stains on the ground, or apparent blood stains on the ground.
And that's what I've zoomed in on here, sir.
Yes.
Photograph number 44, Sergeant Detective, does this show a little bit better of an angle? I'm showing the actual corner of the intersection of Herald Street and Shawmut Avenue, showing the markers placed by you and other crime scene personnel, as well as the final marker, number 6.
Yes, it does.
And this number 6 is represented on Exhibit 61 to your left, that diagram right here, which again is more on Herald Street on the sidewalk as opposed to on Shawmut Avenue.
Yes.
And the areas marked by the orange markers, such as I'm zooming in on here, again, an apparent blood stain.
Yes.
Counsel, may I see you at sidebar, please?
Exhibit 62, can you tell us what we see in this angle?
That's cone number 5, which also marks an area of reddish-brown stain.
And is, just again, perspective from where we are, is this the driver's side door of the BMW?
Yes.
And this is a sidewalk over here?
Yes.
And the area what appears to be broken glass, that's the rear door of the driver's side, correct?
That's correct.
Photograph number 49, does that show an area that was marked with potential red-brown stains, as well as an area of representative red-brown stains that were collected as item number 5?
Yes.
Photograph 50 is a closer up, or more close-up, zoomed-in version of that same area.
It's a closer photo, yes.
Exhibit number 62, photograph 51, does that show cone or evidence marker 5 indicating a red-brown stain that was observed and ultimately collected by
Yes.
you or other crime scene personnel at the scene?
Yes.
And similarly, was this item collected and then submitted to the Boston Police Department Crime Laboratory?
Yes.
Photograph number 52, the same stain, number 5, but this time with the evidence marker removed, is that correct?
Yes.
Photograph number 53 of Exhibit 62, can you tell us what we see here?
Several of the orange unnumbered evidence markers on the ground heading towards the rear of the BMW from the driver's side.
Sergeant Detective, is there any significance to the way that the evidence markers, and when I say evidence markers here, I'm referring to those orange triangles, is there any significance to the way the point is facing?
It's pointing towards the reddish-brown stains, towards the drop of apparent blood, but I don't think you can draw any idea of directionality from that as far as any path.
Photograph number 54 of Exhibit 62, can you tell us what's depicted in this photograph, sir?
It's the rear driver's side of the BMW, also showing the ground, several orange markers, and evidence marker number 4.
Evidence marker 4, again, was an area where a representative red-brown stain was collected by you or other crime scene personnel, is that correct?
Yes.
And we're going to go to that now. The marker number 4. I've placed on the screen photograph 55 of Exhibit 62. Does that show area number 4 on the back of the car that you see on Exhibit 61, the board to your left, directly behind the car?
Yes, it's the corner of the car, the rear driver's side corner of the car, looking towards the rear.
Photograph 56 of Exhibit 62, does that again show the area of red-brown staining, in particular an area that you or other crime scene personnel collected, swabbed, as an item of evidence submitted to the Boston Police Department Crime Laboratory?
Yes, I believe Officer Kahns is the one who collected all the swabs.
Photograph 57 is a close-up of that same stain, sir, is that correct?
Yes.
Now finally, the last photograph of exhibit number 62, Sergeant Detective, seems similar to the first photograph I showed you. Can you describe what this is? And for the record, it's photograph 58.
Yes, that's a picture of the grayscale card, which we used to start the photos. On this one, there's an end time also.
Now, so that indicates the end time, the time that the crime scene was done being processed, or at least the time that the photographs were done being completed was 5:45 in the morning, is that correct?
Yes,
And would that be the time that the crime scene was closed, or the time that the photographs were completed?
the time that the photographs were completed.
Do you know when you cleared from that crime scene, so to speak, or left that crime scene?
About the same time as the photos were done, we had to wait for the tow truck.
Sergeant Detective, describe, if you would, the decision that was made to tow the car and how it was towed and where it was towed to.
Any evidence tow is towed on a flatbed tow truck, not on a traditional wrecker. So they do not lift up one set of wheels and tow it with one set of wheels touching the ground. They actually tow the car onto the back of a flatbed, and it's towed back to either Boston Police Headquarters or one of the district stations, depending on the nature of the case.
And in this particular case, Sergeant Detective, was a decision made to tow the car with the body still in it?
Yes,
Why was that done, sir?
for a couple of reasons. One, because we didn't want to process the car out in public view, and two, we needed to get a search warrant.
Now, you indicated that it was towed to a particular location. It would depend on the nature of the incident. Where was this car with the bodies towed to, sir?
Boston Police Headquarters.
In what particular area of Boston Police Headquarters? Was there some type of exam bay or something like that?
There's an evidence bay on the first floor adjacent to the crime scene unit.
And were you present when the car was loaded onto the flatbed tow truck?
Yes.
And describe what you observed, that process. In other words, describe how it was brought up onto the flatbed.
The tow truck backed up to, I believe, the front end of the car and raised the ramp and used tow cables to pull the car up onto the ramp.
Now, Sergeant Detective, as far as the potential movement of evidence during the towing process, are you aware that some evidence could have moved during the towing process?
Yes.
But calling your attention now to the back seat of the vehicle, when you had an opportunity to view it later on at the Boston Police Department exam bay, did you see that projectile in essentially the same location where you had previously seen it in the back seat?
Yes, it was in the same spot.
Calling your attention now, Sergeant Detective, to the processing of this car back at the exam bay. When the car was taken to the exam bay of the Boston Police Department headquarters, was a search warrant applied for and received, sir? At some
Yes,
point?
at some point, yes.
Were you present when the search warrant of that vehicle was executed and the vehicle was processed on that same date, July 16th, 2012?
Yes.
Do you know about what time that process started?
I believe it was about 1:30, 1:45, I think.
And similar to what you described previously, sir, with the crime scene, was the car itself in the exam bay processed in a similar manner, meaning was it photographed without evidence markers and then photographed with evidence markers?
Yes.
Can I approach witness round?
You may.
And similar to what you described for the processing of the crime scene, was a gray card taken indicating what time the photographs were begun in the processing of that car, sir?
Yes.
And the document, or I should say the photograph I placed before you, do you recognize that, sir?
Yes,
What do you recognize that to be?
that's the grayscale card that was used to start the photos.
Your Honor, if the photograph is the next number exhibit.
Exhibit 63.
This one.
Just placed exhibit 63. According to this, it indicates the photographs were begun on July 16th, 2012, the time being 13:14. Is that military time, sir?
That's military time.
What does that mean in regular time?
1:14 p.m.
Sergeant Detective, prior to the interior of the car being examined pursuant to the search warrant, was the exterior of the vehicle inspected by you and other officers and ultimately photographed?
Yes, it was.
May I approach your witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Sergeant, I'm going to show you 14 photographs. I'd ask you to take a look, and actually we'll do one at a time for Ms. King. First, the first photograph, is that a fair and accurate representation of the back of the BMW as it was placed in the Boston Police Evidence Exam Bay on July 16, 2012?
It's a picture of it when we returned to execute the warrant, yes.
Ask that be marked as the next numbered exhibit, Your Honor.
Counsel, any objection?
No objection.
Thank you. Without objection, exhibit 64.
Actually, Sergeant Detective, I'd ask you to look at the next 5 photographs. Are those fair and accurate representations of various angles of the BMW when it was being processed in the exam bay at the Boston Police Department headquarters on July 16, 2012?
Yes.
That's what the next 6 photographs to be marked as the next numbered exhibit. All of the car.
Without
Exterior.
objection, counsel?
No objection.
All right, exhibit 65 through 69.
I'll set that.
I'm showing you 6 more photographs, Sergeant Detective. I'd ask you to look at those. Are those photographs fair and accurate representations of the bodies still sheeted, placed in the exam bay upon the arrival at the exam bay on July 16, 2012?
It's photographs not upon the arrival, but when we began the execution of the search warrant.
I'm sorry, when the search warrant was began, sometime after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, these are photographs of the bodies inside the car, but still sheeted, is that correct?
Yes.
And 6 in total, Your Honor, I'd ask to be marked as the next numbered exhibit.
Without objection, counsel?
No, sir.
Exhibit 70 through 75.
Sergeant Detective, just two more in this batch. I'm asking you to look at two photographs and tell me if you recognize those, sir.
Yes,
Are those fair and accurate representations of the exterior of the car looking into it, but these two photographs showing the back seat area of the BMW?
yes,
Perhaps the two photographs of the interior of the vehicle back be marked as the next number.
Counsel, without objection. Exhibit 76, 77.
Sergeant Detective, while I'm up here, have you had an opportunity to look at 184 digital photographs that have been placed onto a thumb drive relative to the search warrant executed on the BMW on July 16, 2012?
I looked at the photos. I don't know if it's 183 or 184, but I did look at the digital photos, and they were put on a thumb drive.
And those were fair, all of them in their entirety are fair and accurate representations of the processing of the BMW on July 16, 2012?
Yes.
Your Honor, ask that this be marked only for identification only.
Very good.
No objection.
Only for identification.
Yes, sir. Sergeant, Detective, I'm putting Exhibit 69 on the screen. That is just an exterior view of the back passenger side of the car, correct?
Yes.
And you can still see the apparent red-brown stains that you previously observed and testified about at the crime scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'll show you Exhibit number 65. Does that show the driver's side of the BMW inside of the exam bay at Boston Police Headquarters?
Yes.
I'm just calling your attention to the exterior area. That's the actual exam bay, sir?
That's the garage door to the evidence bay garage.
Can you describe the evidence bay, what it was, what it is, or what it was back then in 2012?
It's a large garage area. You can fit 2 full-size vehicles in there. We use it for processing motor vehicles that get towed in relative to crime scenes. We keep some material out there that we use when we process motor vehicles.
Sergeant Detective Duff, can you describe for the processing of the BMW pursuant to the search warrant, were any other units present when this was being done, or was it just you?
There were other people from the latent print unit there, the homicide unit, the crime scene unit, and the district attorney's office.
And how many assistant district attorneys were present, if you recall?
2.
And who was that? Do you recall?
Yourself and I believe ADA Janice Nobles.
Now, sir, on exhibit number 65 that's been placed on the screen, we can see the back driver's side passenger door. Is that correct?
The rear driver's side door, yes.
And does that appear to have less glass than it did at the scene, sir?
Yes.
Describe, if you know, how that happened.
During the transport of the motor vehicle from the scene to headquarters, some of the broken glass fell out of the frame.
But prior to being transported, that glass was photographed. Is that correct?
At the scene, yes.
I've placing Exhibit 70 on the screen. Does that show the inside of the car as you previously testified regarding the body still sheeted?
Yes.
Exhibit 71 on the screen, again, another angle of the body still sheeted. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Placing Exhibit number 76. Is that a photograph of the interior, the back seat of the BMW, sir?
Yes.
And can you see the copper projectile you previously described seeing at the scene right there, sir?
Yes, I'm having difficulty seeing this. It's not focused well. Yes, now I can see it.
That's the area right there, sir?
Yes.
Photograph 77, is that a more close-up? I'll back out. Close-up photograph of the rear driver's side window.
Yes.
Now, Sergeant Detective, after photographs were taken of the exterior of the car, at some point pursuant to the search warrant, was the interior of the car searched for potential evidence?
Yes.
May I approach you, sir? May I approach you, sir?
You may.
Show you 13 photographs, sir. Look at those and tell me if you recognize what's depicted in those photographs.
These are photos of the interior of the vehicle. The first ones are of the rear, and the last few are of the front seat and the victims in the front seat.
And those photographs are fair and accurate representations of the interior of the vehicle prior to the placement of cones. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, the 13 photographs we enter as the next number.
Attorney objection.
No, sir.
Without objection, will be received.
Sergeant Detective, I'm placing on the screen what's been entered as exhibit number 78. Do you recognize what's depicted there, sir?
It's a photo of the rear seat of the BMW from the passenger side rear.
I'm now placing exhibit number 79 on the screen. Does that show a different angle of, or a different perspective of the rear seat, sir?
It's the rear seat from the driver's side.
And the item I'm pointing to with the laser pointer, was that the phone that you previously described?
Yes.
Placing exhibit 80 on the screen. Is that another photograph showing the back seat area, sir?
Yes.
What part are we looking at and what angle?
We're looking at the rear seat from the passenger side towards the driver's side. You can see the broken window glass. You can see the cell phone on the seat.
The cell phone is right here.
Yes.
Placing exhibit 81 on the screen. What's depicted there, sir?
It's a closer view of the gold-colored metal fragment, the copper-colored metal fragment on the rear seat.
I don't know if you can see on that photograph, sir, but you see reddish-brown stains in the area around it.
Yes.
Exhibit 82. Can you tell us what's depicted in that photograph, sir?
That's a closer view of the cell phone
That's on the back rear seat.
on the rear seat. Yes.
Sir, I'm placing on the screen what's been entered as exhibit number 84. Can you tell us what that is and where it was?
That is a sort of a wallet or wristlet, a purse, a very small purse with a wrist strap under the driver's seat. That's looking at it from the rear driver's side floor area.
Placing on the screen exhibit number 85. Can you tell us what's depicted in that photograph?
It's part of the door jamb near on the driver's side. You can see some labels on the door frame, and that's looking straight down towards the floor. And you can see what turns out to be a spent projectile, basically in the middle of the photograph.
Placing exhibit 86 on the screen. Is that a more close-up photograph of what you described as a spent projectile that's on the driver, near the driver's side door jamb between the front and back seats?
Yes.
Placing on the screen exhibit number 87. Does that show the floor area of the driver's side?
Yes.
And the driver's foot appears to be placed on what, if you could tell?
I can't really tell from this photo because of it's kind of dark.
Approach wings, sir.
You may.
Showing you exhibit 87, and tell me if you can see where the driver's right foot is located.
Well, his right foot appears to be on one of the pedals. I can't see which one.
Detective, I'm just going to place another photograph, exhibit number 90, on the screen. Does that photograph tell us what's represented in that photograph?
That's a close-up of the hands of the driver of the motor vehicle.
And when you conducted the search, was there something in the driver's hand ultimately that was secured as evidence?
Yes, a cell phone.
Approach witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Sergeant Detective Duff, I'm showing you 6 photographs. Can you tell us if you recognize those photographs?
Yes, they're photos of the victim who's seated in the passenger seat from various angles.
And those are fair and accurate representations of how he was observed by you and photographed after the sheets were removed.
Yes.
Your Honor, for the 6 photographs is the next number of exhibits.
All right, counsel, let me see you at sidebar while Ms. King is marking those.
Now, Sergeant Detective, after the vehicle was opened during the pursuant to the search warrant, during the execution of the search warrant, the sheets were removed, correct? You testified to that?
Yes, they were.
What was done with the sheets as far as preserving potential evidence?
They were turned over to, I believe, Detective McIsaac, and they were secured and submitted to the crime lab.
Calling your attention now, sir, to the next stage of the processing of that BMW, including the bodies of Mr. D'Abreu and Safiro Furtado. At some point, were evidence markers or cones similar to what we saw at the crime scene used to mark potential items of evidence?
Yes.
And in addition to evidence markers, or also referred to as evidence cones, did you and other members of the Boston Police Department Crime Scene Response Unit also employ tape to mark particular items of potential evidence?
Yes, areas that appeared to be damaged from bullet strikes, bullet holes were marked with ruler tape.
May I approach you, Your Honor?
You may.
Sergeant Detective Duff, I'm going to show you a large board and ask you to look at that.
Yep.
You've seen this chart before, is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And does this appear to be a fair and accurate representation of the interior of the BMW, specifically the approximate location of various pieces of evidence that were located by you relative to the processing of that BMW?
By me or by other members of the crime scene unit or the latent print unit, yes.
It is a fair and accurate representation of the evidence recovered from the BMW?
Yes.
You're asked that the diagram be marked for identification only, and that the smaller version be the letter A of that identification.
We have no objection for identification.
All right. You said P for identification?
P1 and P2, Your Honor.
Thank you.
One is board, P2 is the
Now, as you testified, Sergeant Detective, at this point in processing of the BMW in the exam bay on July 16, 2012, evidence markers were placed on items of potential evidence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And calling your attention now to what was marked as item number 1. What was item number 1?
The driver of the motor vehicle, the victim.
That would be the body of Daniel Diabrera.
Yes.
Item number 2, relative to the diagram that's been placed to your left, what was marker number 2 showing?
The victim on the passenger seat.
Marker 2 showed Safiro Furtado.
Correct.
Item 3, sir, what was that?
The copper projectile from the back seat.
That was the one that you identified on the rear floor behind the
sorry.
driver's seat. Is that correct?
Yes, the copper jacketed projectile from the rear of the motor vehicle under the driver's seat. It's
And
kind of
that's-
between the front and the back.
And that's the area that I'm pointing to here, sir?
Yes.
Item number 4, what was that?
What was the wristlet that was under the driver's seat?
Item 5,
Was the copper jacketed projectile from the rear seat?
and the phone on the rear seat, was that item number 5?
Yes.
And the number 6 was the copper projectile that you observed on the rear seat?
Yes. Number 6 was the copper jacketed projectile, yes.
And the final item, at least observed by you, was item number 7, the cell phone that was in the driver, Mr. Daniel Diabrera's lap. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Airbrush Windstrom?
You may.
So, Detective, I'm placing 22 photographs in front of you, asking you to look through those and tell us if you recognize what's depicted.
They're photographs of the interior motor vehicle after they've been marked with evidence cones, items 1 through 7.
And in addition to that, Sergeant Detective, are those 22 photographs fair and accurate representations of items marked as 1 through 6?
I thought I saw cone 7 in there.
I'm sorry, 1 through 7.
Yes.
You're going to display, I believe, introducing 22 photographs to the next number of units.
Without objection or with objection?
No objections.
Without objection, they're received.
97 through 118.
Thank you.
I think that's 97 through 117.
117.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sergeant Detective, just placing Exhibit 97. Does that show the two cones that marked the two bodies of the victims?
Yes.
Exhibit 98, similar as well, is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Placing on a screen now exhibit number 101. Do you see the evidence markers on this photograph, sir?
Yes, 3 through 5, 3, 4, and 5.
And what is number 3 again, sir?
3 is the projectile that was found on the floor to the rear of the driver's, the front driver's seat, kind of between the front and the back seat.
Placing exhibit number 102 on the screen. Does that show close-up The projectile you described, number 3,
Yes.
as well as number 4, some type of change purse of some sort you described, I think?
Yes.
More close-up of item number 3. Is that the item we see here, sir?
Yes.
And what was that again?
It's a projectile.
Exhibit number 104. Does that show that same projectile, but this time with a ruler marking its size?
Yeah, with a scale. Yes.
Exhibit number 105. Is that a close-up of that item, sir?
Yes, it is.
And you indicated that's an actual projectile, is that correct?
It's what it appears to be, yes.
(106), that same projectile, is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And just showing you exhibit number 107, does that show the item after it was collected?
Yes.
That's that same projectile that's found on the rear driver's side floor, just behind the driver's seat?
Yes.
Exhibit number 108, is that the same item after it was removed, but from a different angle, showing the lead core?
Yes.
Exhibit 109, showing the change purse. Was that item ultimately secured as a potential piece of evidence?
Yes, it was.
Exhibit number 110, marked by evidence marker 5, is that the cellular phone that was observed on the rear seat of the vehicle?
Yes.
Is that item seized as a potential piece of evidence?
Yes.
Is that turned over to homicide detectives?
Yes.
Exhibit 111, is that the same cell phone we've just discussed, item number 5, or evidence marker number 5, this time with a ruler showing the size?
Yes.
Calling your attention now to exhibit number 113, marked by evidence marker number 6. First, can you show us on the board that's been marked for identification where item number 6 was found? Right here. And that's the copper projectile fragment that you described seeing at the scene of the incident on Harold Street and Shawmut Avenue, as well as seeing back in approximately the same location at the Boston Police Evidence Bay. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's the item that we see on exhibit 113 there, sir?
Yes.
Just placing exhibit 115 on the screen. Does that show the apparent copper projectile, or at least a fragment of a projectile that was marked by cone number or evidence marker 6?
Yes.
Finally, Sergeant Detective, relative to the item marked as item number 7, placing on the screen exhibit number 116. Does that show the evidence marker number 1 for the body of Daniel D'Abreu, but item number 7 for the cellular telephone that appeared to be in his lap or hand?
Yes, number 7 is for the phone. It's hard to see any part of the phone in that photo, though.
Placing exhibit number 117 on the screen. Can you see the phone in that photograph, sir?
You can see part of the phone in that, between his hands, yes.
Mr. Hagan, how much longer will you be with us?
For about 10 minutes, Your Honor.
All right, why don't we take our morning recess and now, and we'll resume at 11:20.